Okay, so good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. It's really great to see you all joining this session. My name is Jonathan Wilcox. I'm a researcher at the University of Leeds in the UK, and I will be your host today. Now, next slide, please. Tom, could you go back one, please? Thank you. Okay, so the focus of this side event is pit latrine emptying and transport services, and we will be exploring this topic by looking at the different and conflicting roles of the public sector, the private sector, and development actors in scaling access to services. Safely managed sanitation requires many different people and groups of people to work together. So when we started talking about this session in March, we wanted to make the most of the conference being online and free to attend. So we've taken the opportunity to bring people together who would not normally attend this conference, myself included, and have tried to extend participation and the scope of this session to match. So thank you all so much for attending, for your time and for the contributions you will make during the event, and also to the presenters, rapporteurs and other organisers for their support and time preparing to make the side event happen. I won't name them all now to save time, but they will introduce themselves when first speaking. I could have the next slide, please. So before we start, I would particularly like to thank our sponsors and the sponsors of the conference, because we wouldn't be able to do this type of event without them making the conference free for everybody to attend. Next slide, please. So we are all aware that there is a huge requirement for pit emptying and transport services to achieve SDG 6.2.1, particularly in East and Southern Africa, where this type of containment is very common in unplanned urban areas. Everywhere, what is referred to as the private sector provides emptying services of varying quality, but they are not always legal, hygienic, manually safe, or include safe disposal of fecal sludge. And I think it's fair to say that a market failure for these services is occurring. As you all highlighted in the poll before we started the event properly, there are many things required for services to form part of the safely managed sanitation system, and the private sector is unlikely to do this all on its own. So something is required to ensure that particularly low-income households can access safe services and that everyone enjoys the full benefits of safely managed sanitation. Over the last decade or so, many public authorities and development actors have made efforts to improve service quality, and we will be drawing on some of that experience in this event. Can I have the next slide, please? Okay. So the main objective for today is to give everyone the opportunity to contribute to a discussion on this topic, and for us all to hear from a wide range of perspectives, from researchers, development agencies and investors, but also from public officials across WASH and private sector service providers. We've tried to design an event to make this happen and have a lot to fit in the next 75 minutes. So first, we'll be going back to Poll Everywhere for some audience polling questions to get you all thinking about different aspects of this topic. And then I'm really excited to be able to hand over to an awesome set of presenters from a range of different organisations. They'll be providing 3 brief research presentations from 3 cities, Kampala, Blantyre and Kisumu. This will be followed by the main focus of the event. We'll leave this room, go back to Parkable, and you will all have the choice of a city-themed breakout room hosted by someone from the public sector in that city. Each breakout will include a short introduction from the host before taking the learnings from the 3 earlier research presentations to discuss the different roles for scaling services in that city. After 30 minutes in the breakout room, we'll come back to this main room for a quick plenary session where rapporteurs will share highlights from each of the breakout sessions. And at this point, I think we'll start to see the similarities and differences across the contexts. After this, there will be a keynote covering the role of development actors in scaling safe services. And if at any point during the session you have any questions, please post them on Pathable, and we will try to answer them live or pick them up at the end. And just so you're aware, the whole event is being recorded, and we will be planning to share a blog about the discussion at some point in the future. Okay, could I have the next slide, please? Thank you. Okay, so before we get going on the polling questions, I would like to quickly run through some terminology. I think it's important to emphasize and to accept that there is ambiguity in the definitions that are often used in this space of pit littering, emptying, and transport services. So I wanted to flag some terms, but also encourage you all to be flexible and open-minded about how terms are used by everybody during the session, because the definitions can vary from location to location. And I will flag just one that will be highlighted in more detail later on. But the enterprises providing services don't follow the strict definitions and characteristics that we would like to use as researchers. For example, enterprises that are often referred to as providing pit emptying services can also empty septic tanks. And in some places, those referred to as manual emptiers can and do use mechanical equipment from time to time to empty containments. Next slide, please. Okay, and Tom, could we please flip back to poll everywhere? Thank you. Okay, and so whilst Tom's loading this up, I'll explain a little bit more. So there's going to be a handful of questions, I think about 5 or 6, and we will go through them all quite quickly. So please don't be cautious about your answers. Okay, that's great. I can see that you've started to submit your answers. So in this question, I'd like you to think about how people know specifically about informal service providers. And so within this, we'll include the majority of pit emptiers, those that are not registered with local authorities. Thanks, Tom. And so the next question is similar but slightly different. And I'd like to ask you, how do you think people know about formal service providers? So these are emptiers who are registered with local authorities. This could include both manual and mechanical emptiers. And it's likely to be emptiers that transport sludge to treatment or to safe disposal. Okay, starting to see a difference in the answer to the previous question. That's really interesting. Just wait a few more moments for this to settle down. Very different. Okay, that's great. Thanks, Tom. So now I'd like you to think about the factors which affect scaling of safe services. This could be to do with a bunch of things like geography or equipment, or maybe some more specific things like access to finance. And again, if you see someone else has entered something you agree with, please enter the same thing too. And I think I'm noticing that if you submit a sentence, it will break it up. So if you can try to submit single words, that would be great. Thank you. Okay, super. I'll just leave this for a few more seconds to let it settle down. Okay, thank you, Tom. So similar question, but now about, oh, sorry, I've got the orders confused. Okay, so this question is about what methods you think are effective for increasing the coverage of safe services, and whether you think learnings can be applied universally across all cities, or whether you think they're very context specific and will only work in certain locations. So if you think it's universal, go to the right of the scale on the happy face, and if you think it's context specific, please on the left with the sad face. Okay, starting to see a trend for more towards context specific, but not completely context specific. So I get the feeling that people are thinking that there are some learnings which can be transferred from location to location, but mostly not. Okay, and so this question is kind of similar, but it's about the role of the private sector and how much support they need from the public sector.
Sorry guys, what am I supposed to do here? Do I just hover with my mouse?
Okay, have you just joined the session?
No, I didn't, but on this particular question, where I have to, do I just hover?
I think if you click on the face.
Ah, now I see it, okay.
Yeah, okay, great, thanks for asking the question. That's wonderful. Okay, we're getting to the end of the questions now. So potentially slightly controversial question, and there's a lot to think about with this one, I think. I want to ask you whether you think that the private sector, specifically safe service providers, are commercially viable. So I know there's a lot to think about with this question, but encourage you to share an answer if you can. Okay, that's great. That's interesting, showing a slightly different trend to one of the previous questions. Okay, so I think this is the last question. And now I want you to think about what the most important costs are for safe pit latrine emptying and transport services. So the ones which make up the biggest cost for this type of service provider. And this might be things like PPE or registration with local authorities and transport. And you can also vote on ones that have been submitted by other people. So please, let's just see which rise to the top. Tom, could you scroll down a bit as well so we can see some of the other suggestions that are down the bottom? That's great, thank you. Okay, that's interesting. Transport's coming out as the clear number one for everyone, as well as labour. Okay. So if you're all done submitting your answers, Tom, could I ask you please to head back to the slide deck? Thank you. And could you go to the next slide, please? That's great. Okay, so that was really interesting to see all of your responses, and I hope it got you thinking about some of the considerations for scaling services. Now we're going to move on to the research presentations from the 3 cities in this order: Blantyre, Kampala, and Kisumu. So please take some notes to use this learning in the breakout rooms later, and also have a think about which room you would like to join after the presentations are finished. And now I would like to hand over to Brian for the first presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. My name is Brian Lenga. I'm the Sanitation Program Officer for Water for People in Malawi. Next slide, please. I'm going to share with you some results, but before that, I would like to share with you the research objectives and methodology for Blantyre. The first one is to identify biggest cost drivers and most impactful levers to improve net profitability of pit emptying enterprises, but also identification of critical public sector investments and regulatory measures to scale financially viable pit emptying businesses. And the last objective for the research was to identify critical investments and business development support that allowed these enterprises to attain viability. So what we did is that we did the interviews with 55 households. We are also currently doing the quantitative interviews with 10 formal service providers. This is in progress currently. And finally, we'll be doing the qualitative interviews with specific 7 formal service providers. This will be November this year. Next slide, please. Some of the interesting results which came out from this research. The first one was wanted to find out how pit emptiers are found by income level. This is to do with the socioeconomic groups. We noted that households find service providers mainly through word of mouth, especially if they are very poor. You could see from the graphs that in all the socioeconomic groups, there's at least a percentage of word of mouth. But mainly, what we could be able to see was the issue of the rich get most of these emptiers by, they get information from advertising. Next slide, please. So the other interesting aspect which was noted was that the poorer you are, the longer to empty your pits. So wanted to find out how long does it take to remove sewage by neighborhood in terms of the socioeconomic groups, from the rich, the middle class, the poor, and the very poor. And we noted that it takes longer for it takes quite long from 2 to 6 hours to empty latrines from very poor people, while it's more faster to empty a latrine from a rich segment of the socioeconomic groups. Next slide, please. In terms of the quantity emptied by income group, we wanted to find out the average quantity of sewage removed in terms of the liters by income level. And it was noted that most of the sewage is removed within the rich segment of this socioeconomic group, while the poor, as you can see, it's about 2,800, while the poor, there's a fairly little quantity of sewage which is removed by pit emptiers. Next slide, please. The pit emptying enterprises, who are they? In Blantyre, we have about 16 financially viable small enterprises, and these can be categorized in different groups. We noted that from the research, we noted that 69% use small manual pumps, mostly galcos, while 31% use cesspool trucks. But also, we also noted that 13% were able to rent equipment from fellow competitors. And just to add to that, we noted that 50% initially were trained by NGOs, and the other 50% just entered the market organically. So those who are trained by NGOs who are doing fecal sludge management, they're about that much, which is 50%. About 31% of the owners of these enterprises are university degree holders, which maybe implies that probably the business in pit emptying service provision is slowly becoming attractive to a different class of emptiers. But also we noted that 13% are spin-offs. These are those who previously worked for another emptier and saw that there are opportunities in pit emptying and decided to start their own businesses. While 13% were started by former NGO staff. These are the people who were in supporting pit emptiers and they've retired and they decide to go into the business of pit emptying. Next slide, please. Cost drivers for enterprises. We are currently undertaking this analysis to develop detailed financial models of different businesses. These can be later on shared when we get the contacts. But also preliminary results at the moment show that the big expenses are mainly around transport, especially for those pit emptiers who hire vehicles from transporters. So this has showed that this is the main expense pit emptiers have. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. I'll take you through the next research highlights from Kampala. My name is Brenda Achiro, Senior Sustainability Manager, Water for People in Uganda. Next slide, please. So I want to redo the research objectives. They are similar to those that Brian just presented. So I'll go straight into the data. Thank you, Tom. Yeah, so in Uganda, we had some interesting findings also coming up. Now we do have a call center that is managed by Kampala Capital City Authority. Of course, it offers different types of services in the city, including linking people to pit emptying services. So our results actually showed that not all groups were actually being served by the call center. It was just a few of them that fell in the cluster or in the classes of middle class and poor. And then of course, the very poor and the very rich, we see that they preferred the word of mouth and almost not the call center at all. So we shall be discussing more of that also in the breakout session, but certainly the very poor prefer the word of mouth because they want immediate feedback, immediate engagement in case they have questions about a service. Next slide, please. Yes, pit emptying is delayed due to financial hardship for the poorest. Yes, of course, and particularly among the very poor, we'll see that all the time pit emptying is delayed due to financial hardship, and that is because they are faced with different pressing needs, you know, and pit emptying, of course, doesn't come high on their priority list. So they really struggle with that, and yeah, so their pit emptying is normally delayed because of that, compared to all the other social classes. Next slide, please. The poorest empty the bare minimum. Yes, we see the very poor, they're having a very small count of 170. And this is really mainly because the pattern of pit emptying among the very poor is dependent on how much they're able to afford. For example, with the pit emptying using the Galpa, you'll find that they'll negotiate to have just a bit emptied, not the entire pit emptied, but they'll just say, no, I can only afford 2 barrels or 3 barrels. So overall, they can only empty the bare minimum. So that's why we see that very low among the very poor class. Next slide, please. So in terms of the pit emptying enterprises, what does the picture look like in Kampala? 20% of enterprises are women-owned, which is quite interesting. And we are happy about it, at least in Uganda, that we have a number of women taking on the business of pit emptying. 71% own their vehicles, and this high percentage is also because of some of the financial support through the banking, through loans that we're able to connect them to. So we see more and more of them actually acquire vehicles, as the years go by. but we still also have 29% renting pickup trucks on a daily or whenever there's some business to do. 38% own tricycles with the manual pump and barrow. 43% own a pickup truck, and then 50% of them were initially trained by NGO. That's in terms of their technical capacity to actually offer the service of pit emptying. We find that 50% of them was through NGO support, and then the other 50% really entered the market organically. Now, the 43% spin-off is an interesting highlight for us. 43% of these enterprises have actually previously worked for another emptier, meaning they've been able to see the money, they've been able to smell the money, and therefore start their own businesses. Next slide, please. So in terms of the cost drivers of the enterprises, of course, transport cost ranks high right there, especially for those that have to hire on a daily about 20 or 30 US dollars per day. Then also the distance to the households. If it's a household that is far away from the dumping point or out of the city, then certainly that will affect the cost per barrel emptied. The amount and quantities to be emptied. For example, if a service provider gets to a household and they probably only want 2 or 3 barrels to be emptied, but that doesn't make a lot of business sense for the service provider, so the cost tends to go up. Then the state of the toilet, the more risky toilets, of course, are charged a little more because the service provider has to take high precaution during the process of emptying. The amount of solid waste in the pit, and then the dumping fees. But overall, the transport cost ranks high as the biggest cost driver. Thank you very much.
Great, thanks, Brenda. Hi, everybody. My name is Nicola Green, and I'm the Director of Opero Services here in Kenya, and I'm joined by my colleague, Lenga. So Opero is a social enterprise based in Kenya, and we work exclusively to support and scale wash businesses. We do that through 3 main avenues. Technology, we want to trial and make technology more accessible. Business development, working directly with wash enterprises to train them on their business needs, and also in markets. So conducting market research and getting the data that's necessary to get wash businesses moving. So yeah, I wanted to produce or share with you some of our findings from the work that we've been doing in Kisumu. So we can move to the next slide. So we actually only started working in Kisumu this year, and that was thanks to the Stone Family Foundation. We came with kind of an aggressive and transformational mindset as to how we can really get pit latrine emptying scaling in Kisumu. So some of the work that we've done so far, we've done a rapid market assessment for the emptying and transport businesses. We've looked at different levels of awareness, thought about the different services being used, and done a deep dive on the financial models of the pit emptying enterprises. So yeah, we've interviewed about 150 people and dived pretty deep with 10 formal service providers. Okay, we'll go to the next slide. So yeah, I'll just present some findings on the market overall. So I think one of the really important things we saw was that there was a huge diversity in terms of what we think about manual emptiers. From us, we looked at more of a hierarchy of businesses that we could scale. So we didn't do so much the gender analysis or maybe the geographical analysis, what Waterford people did, but we looked kind of more aggressively with the business mindset as to who was there and what did they need. So what we found at the top of our pyramid were kind of 3 quite formal businesses, 1 who stands out and 2 who could be considered in the same area. And those are the kind of groups that need marketing, operational streamlining, and enabling environment support. On the kind of next level down the pyramid, we found some groups who were reasonably organized but hadn't had as much help. They still didn't have access to equipment, maybe didn't have good global exposure or practical knowledge on how to build a business. And we're still kind of navigating how to even safely dispose waste. They weren't sure if they were allowed, how they could talk to the local utility Kawasco. So we did another kind of group of 6 there. Then we had a much wider group of trained emptiers, maybe around 50, who had kind of been through some of the standard trainings that have been rolled out on safety, on business management and things like that, but weren't really proactively contributing to the sector in a formal way, at least. So those kind of groups need help to kind of structure their businesses. And then at this kind of base, and like the majority of the pyramid is still totally informal, still haven't been exposed to basic training and desperately need capacity development. So we found kind of 200 plus in that type of entrepreneur in Kisumu. So we can go to the next slide. So these are the three companies who are at the top of the period, or of the pyramid. So we have Poa, who are a formal enterprise. They're a registered business, and everybody is working on a per trip model. So Poa are the most expensive. You can see they charge about 6,000 shillings per trip. For shillings to dollars, you can just divide by 100. So it's about $60 per trip, which is really quite high. In 2020, we saw them complete 98 jobs. Another very active group are Lukasasa. They are kind of semi-formalized. They exist as a CBO, which is quite nice for them because it means they don't need to have all the formal company structure. They don't need to pay tax. They don't have the accountant. They can exist a little bit flexibly. So their services are slightly cheaper, about 55 USD. And then Blue Stars are truly a very community-centered organization. They operate quite informally, yet organized, and that allows them to offer services for about $30 each. You can see that resulted in them doing more business than the other groups. In total, we have about 300 jobs there done in 2020, and that's about a 5% market penetration. So this is all based on work that Kiwasco have done. WASUP, Practical Action, and Umande Trust over the course of maybe the past 5 years have been really investing in this sector. And we came in with the mindset of, okay, how do we really transform this now and see massive scale? We're kind of seeing a steadying out of these enterprises where they're getting stuck, kind of 100 jobs a year level. What needs to happen next? So we can go to the next slide. So I was really glad that when you were all filling in the survey, affordability came up really high. So of course, the cost of manual emptying and those costs that I just called out might surprise you. 60 USD per trip to empty a pit latrine really is quite high. And we can see here that it is high per meter cubed and even higher than an exhauster truck. And even double to almost 3 times as much in some cases. So manual emptying is extraordinarily high. And as we've already called out, a bulk of that cost is transport. So all of our groups here are renting transport, and that comes at a high cost, and that's the bulk contributor. I often think we kind of insult these groups to call them emptying businesses, because actually the emptying doesn't cost much money. It's the transport where we're spending all of the money, and really putting these services beyond the affordability in Kisumu. So costs was one major factor. Then on the next slide. So despite the high costs, the other thing limiting growth is the margins are not that exciting. Actually, they're really poor. A good entrepreneur would truly be working somewhere else in Kisumu. These are still great entrepreneurs and they stick at it and they keep going for it. But really, if we look at the price per cubic meter in blue, the costs in red, and then the yellow as margins, you can see that despite the high cost, because they're a formal business, that's a profit for Poa of about $5 per job. So, that's really particularly low. So we're asking these businesses to empty these pits. It's a really tricky job. It takes a whole lot of time. They need to keep it cheap to try keep it affordable. Because of that, they squish their margins, and it's not an attractive sector for anyone to work in, really. So that's 2. So costs and margins, money. And then to the next slide. So yeah, awareness was another key factor. So we won't go through this in depth, but yeah, we saw kind of varying levels of awareness of formal pit latrine emptying services. on the left diagram here. So there's 5 informal settlements that people work in most often. And I think I would call your attention to maybe Nyalenda A, where on the left, we see a huge level of awareness there in blue. And then if we look at the diagram on the right, where we see how are people emptying. So on-site burial is the yellow, and you can see that that's the majority where there's low levels of awareness. And then in Nyalenda A, where we saw that high level of awareness, people really are engaging and using the pickup. So yeah, so awareness is also a really significant barrier. And I think, you know, we asked follow-up questions about how people were finding out and found similar things to what you suggested around it being much more about neighbours than marketing. So yeah, those are the 3 major market barriers for Kisumu: costs, margins, and awareness. So in terms of our next steps in Kisumu, the only way we see to absolutely break through the cost barrier is to use mechanized equipment. I know equipment is a sticky issue and difficult one, but for us, we're looking more at equipment now and subsidies. Equipment and subsidies are the only way we see to create transformational change. So maybe we'll talk a bit more in the breakout room as to our next steps to try to get lots more pits emptied in Kisumu. Thank you.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Nicola, and Brian and Brenda for those presentations. It was really great to hear those recent learnings from the 3 cities. And I hope everybody was taking notes so that they can take this learning into the breakout rooms, which are coming up shortly. Can I have the next slide, please, Tom? Thank you. So you have a choice of 3 rooms hosted by Samden, Alan, and unfortunately, Caroline can't join us, so I will be hosting us in the Kisumu room and doing my best. Next slide, please. Before we go into the rooms, I just really quickly want to preview the discussion questions so you can have them at the back of your mind during the introductory presentations that will be made inside the room. These questions are also available to download from the files section on Profitability so that you can get them from there. And I would like to emphasize that you should discuss these questions in the specific context of the city, recognizing the limitations and opportunities that each context has. Next slide, please, Tom. So to get to the breakout rooms, please go back to Profitable, scroll to the bottom of the page and follow the links. And in there, you will meet the hosts and rapporteurs for each city. And a quick reminder to the hosts to record the breakout sessions. So good luck, have a great time, and I'm going to see you back here in about 20 minutes. Okay, all right, see you all in a bit. Thank you.
All right, as everybody gets back in, we'll be getting started in just a moment.
Okay, just made it back, having a great chat.
Blantyre is ready.
Yeah, okay. I hope you all had a great time in the breakout rooms and made some new connections with the people you met. Now we're going to hear some highlights from the rapporteurs in each room, from Flavius, Brenda and Lincoln. And if I could ask the 3 of you all to turn on your cameras and introduce yourselves when you start to speak. Tom, could you briefly stop sharing screen so that we can see these guys on full screen? And Flavius, Brenda, and Lincoln. I'm not sure if Lincoln's back with us, but we'll start with Flavius. Could you limit your feedback to 1 point for now? And if we have time, we'll go back and take a second point. Thank you. And I think you need to unmute yourself. Yeah. I just want to see, Brenda, are you in the room? Are you able to give any feedback from Kampala whilst we're waiting for Blantyre? Brilliant.
Yes.
Thank you, Brenda.
Yes. Thank you, Jonathan. So again, my name is Brenda Achiro, Water for People in Uganda. And I'll give, I think, like Jonathan has said, just one highlight from each. So for the private sector objective, one key highlight, the fact that the private sector see themselves as a professional and key stakeholder or sector player in service provision. Of course, a lot more was discussed, but certainly them being respected as key stakeholders and players came out really critically. Can I go to the one on public sector role?
Can I come back to you, Brenda? And I've just seen that Lincoln joined us, so we'll hear from Kisumu and then we'll come back to you in a second. Lincoln, the floor's yours.
Thank you, Jonathan. Hi, everyone. My name is Lincoln, and I work with Opero services. So I'll just give you a highlight on private sector barriers. And what we noted is that it's very interesting that one of the barriers is an awareness by communities who actually form the consumers for these services. But the problem is that sometimes, even when you overcome the unawareness issue, and you have consumers who are now aware, there are issues to do with improving the service again, and then improving the service of activities that have costs associated with them. So you realize when you have to professionalize the service itself, if it's pit emptying, there's a bit of cost that comes in and raises the cost of service in the end, so that the consumers are not again able to afford the services. So it's a bit of a negative vicious cycle again in the whole business that is a bit tricky to navigate in. Yeah, thanks, Jonathan.
Okay, thanks, Lincoln. And I just want to check if Flavius or Brian are able to give any feedback from the brand. Great, thank you, Flavius. Just very quickly, because we're running out of time. Thank you.
Yes, for Blantyre, there were a number of issues that came up. Initially, they wanted to know our regulatory law, which we mentioned that as a government, we normally regulate the activities surrounding the sanitation or the pit emptying services. Where we had dwelt much, it was to do with taxation incentives. So it was mentioned that previously all the emptiers were being licensed with one amount of fee. But then after a roundtable discussion of them, we categorize them depending on their volumes. So the bigger the volume, the more the license fee, and the lower the volume, the lesser the license fee. Again, that was the same for tipping fees at the disposal side. We believe the entrepreneurs are supposed to contribute something for the management of the disposal sites. So the tipping fees are also dependent on their volumes that are being discharged.
I'm sorry, I'm going to need to stop because we're running out of time and I need to close the session. But if you could, guys, if you could post your highlights in the chat on Pathable, then people can pick them up from there. Thank you. So unfortunately, we've come to the end of the event today. I want to thank you all for attending and contributing to the discussion. It was great to be able to have you all at the UNC conference. And I hope you've enjoyed the event and you've been able to make some new connections. Please leave any comments you have in the chat on Pathable and follow up with specific people through the Pathable platform. I'll post my email in the chat, so if you have any questions for the presenters, I can pass them on. There are some 2-page summaries of the research on the Files tab on Pathable, which you can take a look at if you're interested. And Finally, I would just like to thank so much all of the contributors to today's session: Water for People, Opero Services, Blantyre City Council, Kampala City Authority, and Kisumu Water and Sanitation Company for providing the content that made this event possible. We couldn't have done it without them. And one final thank you to our sponsors who made this event free, which meant that we could all attend. I don't think we should overlook that. And I'm looking forward to speaking to you all at some point in the future. Thank you so much for attending. It's been really great to have you all. And thanks to Liz also, who's grinning, who unfortunately didn't get to speak, but there's next year, I think. Thanks, everybody.